All right, let's dive into something pretty wild. We're going to break down a scientific paper that tackles a subject you don't usually see in academia: telepathic communication with UAPs. It actually proposes a real method to take these stories out of the realm of pure anecdote and maybe, just maybe, into the world of verifiable data. So the question is, how on earth could science even begin to study something like this? So let's just cut right to the chase. The central claim is, it's a big one. Can people actually communicate with unidentified aerial phenomena using only their thoughts? I mean, it's a claim that's been floating around for decades, but the real challenge has always been, how do you even test that? So there's actually a name for this. It's called a close encounter of the fifth kind, or CE5 for short. Now, unlike most other UFO encounters where someone just happens to see something, a CE5 is all about humans actively trying to initiate the contact. And it's this idea of proactive, human-led communication that this paper is all about. And that really brings us to the million-dollar question, right? How do you apply the scientific method to something that is, by its very nature, a deeply personal, internal, subjective experience? I mean, it's not like you can put a UAP in a test tube. This is the exact problem the white paper is trying to solve. The solution they propose is actually pretty ingenious. Instead of trying to reinvent the wheel, the paper suggests we look to a field where scientists are already studying these kinds of very unusual claims: laboratory research into psychic abilities, also known as psi. Okay, so here's the core idea. On one hand, you have the UAP contact reports. They're all anecdotal, totally subjective, and incredibly hard to prove one way or another. But on the other hand, you've got decades of controlled lab research on psychic mediums, and that field has already developed specific methods and tools for studying exactly these kinds of subjective states. The paper's big idea is to just borrow those tools from the lab and apply them in the field. Now, to get a little more specific for a second, the paper zeroes in on a subcategory they call somatic psi. It's just a scientific term for getting information about living things, living targets, without using your normal five senses. Think of it as the research term for things like telepathy or clairvoyance. This is the specific thing that's been studied in labs for years. So what have all those lab studies actually found? Well, the paper breaks it down into two key parts: the subjective side, what it actually feels like to be in this so-called psi state, and the objective side, what a person's brain physically looks like when they're in it. So let's start with the feeling. People who've been certified as mediums in these lab settings, they consistently report a very similar set of experiences. We're talking about really vivid mental images, a sense that time is slowing down or speeding up, a deep inward focus, kind of losing your sense of self, and, this is crucial, the distinct feeling that information is being received from somewhere else, not just imagined. And here's where it all clicks together. That whole list of feelings from the lab-tested mediums, well, it turns out it's almost a perfect match for the descriptions given by people who claim to have had these CE5 experiences. The overlap in how they describe the experiences it's really striking. But here's the thing, it's not just about feelings. These subjective states have actual measurable signatures in the brain. For example, that trance-like or hypnoidal state, it's linked to a spike in theta brainwaves. That feeling of losing your sense of self, that directly correlates with a decrease in activity in what's called the brain's default mode network, the DMN. So there are physical markers for these feelings. And that brings us to what is probably the most crucial finding from all of this. One EEG study found a direct, positive link between how accurate a medium's statements were and the power of their frontal theta waves. To put it simply, the stronger the theta wave signal, the more accurate the information they received. This really suggests we're looking at a distinct, measurable, and functional state of consciousness. Okay, so we've got a model from the lab that connects subjective feelings to objective, measurable brain data. The next logical step, then, is to take that model and turn it into a practical toolkit that researchers can actually use out in the field. The paper lays out a really straightforward three-step protocol. First, you map the person's subjective experience using standardized psychological questionnaires. Second, you monitor their body with things like portable EEG headsets to look for those specific brainwave signatures, like theta waves. And third, whenever you possibly can, you use control conditions, like blinding the person to the target, to see if the information they're getting is accurate beyond just pure chance. So the immediate goal here is really simple and really clear. It's to take this toolkit into the field, find people who report these CE5 experiences, and see if their brains and bodies are showing the exact same physiological signatures, like those telltale theta waves that have already been documented over and over in controlled lab settings. So let's zoom out for a second. What's the big picture here? What are the broader implications of this whole approach? Why does trying to measure any of this even matter? And honestly, this is the most important takeaway of the whole thing. The point of this research model isn't to prove or disprove anything about UAPs or aliens, not at all. It's about building a methodology, a kind of scientific bridge to begin systematically studying a fascinating and really unusual human experience that up until now has been completely off limits to serious science. Which really just leaves us with this one big compelling question. By borrowing tools from these other, more established fields on the fringes of science, are we maybe witnessing the very first steps in a journey to turn these extraordinary personal stories into structured, analyzable scientific data? I guess only time and a lot more research will tell.